It does. Okay, cool. Hi. So this talk was put together very quickly, so I'm going to apologize for that. My name is Evan. We make a company called San Francisco Compute. We help people get offtake. We make a compute market. Lots of people seem like they are making compute markets nowadays. This talk is a bit about why you would want a compute market in the first place, because I think it's not super obvious. My general asks, though I'll ask it for the rest of the talk, is that we're hiring, and so if you are a systems engineer, a Rust programmer, or you are interested in go-to-market or BD roles, or finance, you should join us. We're growing extremely quickly, and come talk to me, or Conrad, who's somewhere over there. Cool. So yeah, this is a talk about offtake. Just out of like show of hands, because this is Silicon Valley, but also this tech week, and so there's lots of new people coming in. Who knows what the word offtake means? Okay, great. More hands than normally in San Francisco. I'm just going to explain that. So an offtake agreement basically means somebody is buying your cluster from you. So when you finance something, a project, you typically want somebody to like buy that thing from you, so that way you don't just build the thing and then it sort of sits on your balance sheet and then disappears or like lights money on fire. It's really important that you have very good offtake. You have offtake that's from somebody with really low credit risk. But really what this means is just a long-term contract on the cluster that you've got. If you don't have this, you can't finance your data center, or you can't finance your cluster, or you can't finance whatever you're setting up. Offtake in GPUs is not a thing that people have typically thought about in cloud in the same way that we previously thought about it. And so I'm going to walk through how the economics of it work from a very high level. So this might be super obvious to some people, and might be like new information to others. But here's the kind of problem of AI, is that the margins of GPUs never improve. Or, sorry, the margins of the application layers never improve, which also causes the same problem for the cloud providers. So in CPUs, you would set up some CPUs and you would sell to SaaS companies. This is like your Gusto or your Rippling, and they buy your CPUs, and then their revenue goes up, but their costs don't really go up, not at the same rate. Your Gusto or Rippling, you can close a bigger deal by just having your salesperson say the higher number. So your revenue can increase without your costs increasing. But if you're pressing generate, like that's what your application does, every time you press generate, you're spending more money on compute, which means that your margins are thin the whole way through. It like never gets better. There's a lot of people who sort of assume it never gets better, or assume it will get better, but it's just a bitter lesson. It's just scaling laws. It just never actually does get better, because it doesn't work like SaaS. That causes a problem. Because if you're a cloud provider under the hood, no one cares at all about the software that you make. If you're buying, your CPU from a CPU cloud, you care a lot about the software that you're working on. There's a reason why people go with AWS and not Headcenter, or just rack and stack themselves. But if you're a GPU buyer, then you have kind of two options. Do I spend $200 million on a managed service product, or do I spend $100 million in bare metal? So if I wanted the same margins that I would have gotten on CPUs with that same markup, then I might build a great software product. I would build cloud, I would buy a bunch of GPUs, and then I would expect a high markup on those GPUs, a 50% markup or 100% markup or something. And then I would buy $100 million in compute, and I would charge $200 million for my great software product if I wanted the same profile as the CPUs. And if anyone has ever tried selling GPUs, you will immediately learn that no one is ever going to do that, ever. Like, there's no product at all. It doesn't matter what your product does. Because your customer is like an AI lab or something, and that AI lab has raised, big giant fat VC check, and they're going to spend all of it on compute. Their $50 million pre-revenue, whatever, and $48 million is going to compute. And if you try to charge a markup on that, there's no more money in the bank account. It doesn't matter what the company does. So that means that your only value proposition when you're setting up clusters is how do you get the COGS down? Like, how do you make your hardware costs go down? Because then you can compete on price. And the function of COGS is you got a big fat chunk going to NVIDIA, or maybe Spheres. And then you've got your cost of capital. That's a cool lever you can play with. You got your cost of your power, your cost of land, maybe operational costs elsewhere. But your power and your land is also just cost of capital. Because if you were to, say, try and reduce your cost of power, you could buy a power plant. And if you had really cheap cost of capital, and lots of it, you could buy the power plant and get the whole thing cheaper. Same with the land. And so the problem with this
is that if you make great software, if you make a product on top of the application layer, you make a platform as a service company, you make a great cloud provider that has all sorts of nice software, if you're in the business of making software, which is what most of Silicon Valley is, you're just never going to outcompete the UAE. Like you're never going to outcompete Brookfield. You're like never going to outcompete these like massive funds that are deploying capital at wild scale. And there's just like nobody who's got cheaper cost of capital if you just already have like $100 billion to spend and it's like your money. You're just like never going to win. And so your only option if you have great software is to rent. There's somebody else who's going to deploy the cluster. They're going to be the one who owns it because they have cheap cost of capital, they have the access to power, they have the access to land. And you, as building a great software application, either an application company like or a platform as a service or whatever, you're going to need to rent. And then if you own the hardware, so you are the person deploying the capital, or you are the person setting up the cluster, or involved there, your only option is really to sell a long-term contract. Because your customer does not care about the software at all. They're not going to value it in any capacity whatsoever. And because of that, all the other people are not valuing it, which means you need to offer the lowest level access to the hardware. And you pretty much need to sell bare metal. And you need to sell it for a long-term contract, an off-take agreement, that is at a reasonably low margin, so that way you can compete on cost. That causes a problem. Specifically this problem, which is if you are buying, if you're buying compute, if you're an application layer company, your incentive is to buy for as short a period as possible, because if you don't, you'll go bankrupt. If you buy a really long contract from someone, and now your margins are thin, and suddenly your demand is not what you expected, then you will go bankrupt. This is where the bubble is. If you're worried about where the bubble is, it is because there are like countless startups or countless companies right now who are buying long-term offtake agreements on clusters, and then they are selling short-term demand, like short-term usage to their customers. They're basically WeWork. Like all the application layer companies are WeWork. They have net 30 billing, they charge monthly, and they sign up for 3 years on a long-term contract. So if the demand does not go up, then the whole thing blows up, which is not super great. And the problem with that is it's not just like a bet on the demand going up. It's also a bet on your margins somehow improving from nowhere, even though you've locked out in your contract. It's a bet that your usage stays consistent, even through night and day cycles. But meanwhile, like you're never going to set up the clusters. You're never going to get the clusters financed in the first place if you don't give the underlying cluster owner a long-term contract. If you don't give them secure offtake. So basically, if you're buying for peak on your inference load, you might overspend, and then maybe your margins go away. Or if you're buying for base, then you underspend, and then you don't satisfy your SLA, which means your customers disappear, and they go to whoever else who is taking the more risky option of buying for peak, even though that person might be in the bubble and is purely funding on venture capital. Our take at San Francisco Compute is you cannot get secure offtake. You can't get the thing you need to finance clusters if you don't have liquidity. There is no market in the world that is going to support this unless you have liquidity, unless you are able to sign a long-term contract with someone that you can exit, that you can get out of by selling it to somebody else. This is what compute markets do. They are not like an Uber for X, they're a market for offtake. This is how the power markets work to some capacity, but not exactly. It's like actual people in the room a lot better. But this is how it actually needs to work. You need to be able to finance your cluster against an offtake agreement that can exit. Because if you're financing your cluster against an offtake agreement with somebody who is just an application layer company who may or may not have the demand, then that's a bubble. That's something that's going to blow up the economy. So that's what we're doing. We're building the offtake machine. We're building a market for GPU offtake. We're growing very quickly. If you are looking for a job, we would love to have you and love to talk to you. That's pretty much it. We're kind of a very low-key company. Yeah, cool.
Questions?
Are you guys doing the offtake off of your own balance sheet, or are you allowing other people to do the offtake?
When we do it, we get all the cash up front, and then we give it to somebody else. So basically, it is from our balance sheet, but we secure the risk by having cash up front.
Okay.
So we have specific contracts too that like make it so that when particular failure cases happen, like for example the cluster ends, it's not from us. So we've designed them so that we're not the thing that blows up.
Very important.
Yeah, how did you come up with this concept? Because usually when I hear offtake, it's like natural resources, right? Like when I heard about it, it's like lithium mining and doing offtake, contracts. How did you come up with it for data centers?
So we definitely didn't come up with the concept of offtake for data centers, though we came up with San Francisco Compute because we got trapped. So I used to run the Anagram, first batch, and then after that, I started a company that was basically an audio model company. It was kind of like pre-Sonora UDO. It was basically Sonora UDO before that. When you did that, you had to buy an offtake agreement. You had to buy a long-term contract from somebody, and they would take that contract and use that to finance the cluster. We could not afford it because I had raised 500K, which is a very small amount of money to use, or in AI, I guess. And the thing we could afford is to go with someone who didn't look at our bank account, and then we could buy 12 months, paid month to month, and we could afford exactly 1 month, and then we would sublease the other 11 months to somebody else, and that's how we would get our cluster. Unfortunately, when you do that, you immediately go bankrupt every month if you don't sell out your next month, which we learned in about 30 days. Would not recommend it. So then we were in the business of selling that cluster every month, and we became really good at selling that cluster every month. That led us to create a literal order book for selling other people's GPU clusters, because people would come to our website and ask us for more GPUs than we actually had, which meant we would turn around to somebody else and say, hey, do you want this contract? We'll split it up for you. And we became GPU market makers. That ended up developing into what is SF Compute today, which is a literal order book for GPU offtake.
Could you talk about some of your customer profiles, if that's okay?
There's customers on our website, but in GPUs, many people are very private. The thing I can say is that we work with some products you would probably use, but we don't have we signed NDAs and not allowed to talk about them.
Right.
The other thing is that as part of SF Compute, we are very hesitant to appear as competitive to the underlying clouds that we work with, but we work with 11 different clouds, and we do thousands and thousands of GPUs. We're bigger than some GPU cluster or GPU company, or like NCPs is cluster. I don't like saying the word neocloud. It's kind of like a weird, I think it gives the wrong impression. I've been using the word NCP because it's the word NVIDIA uses too much, and that's probably the wrong language. But we're bigger than some and not bigger than others. It's going to be the description.
So would you consider yourself going in the direction of being known as an AI hyperscaler? So like a CoreWeave, like a Lambda Lab, like how, I'm trying to understand what the differentiating
We're trying to
are.
be the grid for GPUs. We don't think any of this works like cloud at all. We don't think it works like hyperscalers. We think that hyperscalers are mostly going to start to buy GPUs from folks that look closer to like Brookfield or something. And they will layer on their own software stack. And our general impression is that they're going to buy from a market that they can sell back on, because if they don't, they will go bankrupt. So we've just taken a very strong bet that everyone who doesn't work with us or work with a market in some capacity is just going to go bankrupt. So you can make really strong bets when you do that.
I really like the idea. I was wondering, like, when you think about commoditizing compute, how are you standardizing like an agent
So at the moment, we have an order book that has a lot of constraints on it. So you can say, first, it has a concept of co-location on the same RDMA fabric. So you can say, oh, all these nodes within the same cluster. And then it has things like storage, network, and various types of SKUs. The other things we do is we just like only allow certain things onto the market and then price them differently. What we're trying to get to, and we're working with vendors to, is to create like SF Compute spec, which is something that you can build against, and you can finance against that. But that will take a bit.
Yeah. How long are the offtake agreements, and how many of them are single customer versus like agglomeration of customers making up an offtake agreement?
So at the moment, the longest we've had is 2 years. That one was a single customer, but the caveat to that is the thing that happens when you make a market for compute is somebody buys a contract, and that's like the initial seed. But then if they sell back liquidity from it, it's technically it's like a conglomeration of a bunch of people. But importantly, if you have the first person pay up front, or you have another person's taking on the credit risk for it, and then the underlying owner is already paid up front. So a little bit more complex than that. This would be easier on the whiteboard.
Last question. Sorry,
Yeah.
said you're something like a market maker for GPU compute, but you also said you have the customer lined up and then you go and offtake. Now, my question is, why don't is there a way your customers go around you and just go offtake themselves because they know what they need and so they go around you?
So the reason why someone works with us on a customer, like from a demand side perspective, is they can sell back. If they went directly to say CoreWeave, they would not be able to sell back. But if they went directly through us and then worked with us with CoreWeave under the hood, then they would be able to sell back, say, 30 to 40% of their capacity that is not used at night or weekends. And that's a default 30 to 40% discount.
Okay,
That's why. So people typically bring us to the data center.